A change of pace for our All God's People program this week.
Had an experience where I almost drowned, and when I came out of the water, long story short, I had one question, and that was, why am I alive? And I think that was the beginning of a call to ministry.
Hello, I'm Connie Vandeman Jeffrey. Dr. Ricardo Graham is the president of the Pacific Union Conference and is well known among our members. His sermons in our churches, columns in the Recorder, short editorials and appearances on All God's People, and his selfless and fearless representation of the interests of the Pacific Union in committees and church meetings have made him a popular and recognizable figure, and an inspiration to those who work with him. Recently, I had the opportunity to interview Elder Graham about the milestones in his life that brought him to the Adventist faith, and his experience as a pastor and leader. This week, we are so happy to bring you some of the highlights from that interview, beginning with how a young Ricardo Graham became acquainted with the Adventist Church in the first place.
My first experience with Adventism was probably through one of my cousins. My great-grandmother, I learned much later, had been a Seventh-day Adventist, and somehow the line was broken. My mother's sister, her oldest sister, reconnected with Adventism, and I had two cousins, I have one still living, David and Jacinta Wilson, who were Seventh-day Adventists. But I had two very loving, Christian, compassionate, committed grandparents, grandmothers particularly, who were very, very spiritual and religious. So they not only attended church, but they attempted to live out what I see now as the model of Christianity in their own lives. One year, my grandmother made a request of my parents and asked them if I could be enrolled in the Seventh-day Adventist school. Its name was Davison at that time in Detroit, Michigan, and my parents consented. I had 3 years, the grades 7th, 8th, and 9th in the Seventh-day Adventist schools, actually 3 different schools in the Detroit area in the early 60s. And I had my experience of becoming a Seventh-day Adventist through that experience. And you know, once I had that experience with those kids, when I went to church school, those young people, particularly in the 8th grade, they just took me in like a long lost brother. Just, man, I was immediately their brother, their friend, their cut buddy. And out of that, my love and experience for the church, I went to Oakwood University, and that was a very powerful experience. And it's been great ever since, in my opinion.
Elder Graham's experiences during this time, and especially at Oakwood University, did much to shape the kind of leader he would be.
I started off as an English major, and then I changed to psychology, and then the combination of psychology and sociology at that time in the academic setting was behavioral sciences, and that was a third quarter. Had an experience where I almost drowned, and when I came out of the water, long story short, I had one question, and that was, why am I alive? And I think that was the beginning of a call to ministry. That question, I couldn't answer it at that moment. Why am I alive? And a few months later, I surrendered my heart completely to the Lord. I just said, I'll do what you want me to do. And the call to ministry came. And that year after my freshman year, when I came back for 1 quarter to Oakwood, I returned 1 quarter of my sophomore year before my cash was exhausted. And when I left, I went back home to Detroit to try to find a job. Dr. Warren actually wrote me a letter. He was not attempting to sway me towards ministry or away from. And to receive a handwritten letter from him, the quarter I did not return, he said he missed me from seeing me on campus. The school was about 500-600 students at that time. And he said that if I continued my education, make sure that I check with the catalog from Oakwood so that my courses at another school would be transferred if my intent was to return, which I did. I went to Wayne State for a year, and then I returned to Oakwood, and I registered as a theology major.
In the mid-'80s, God's leading brought Elder and Mrs. Ricardo Graham and their family to us here in the Pacific Union. He came as a pastor and, well, let him tell the story.
I came to the Pacific Union from Lake Region Conference in 1984. Came on the payroll in Northern California July 1 of that year, and I pastored that church for 8 years. And we established another congregation, which is now known as the Mayfair Church, that continues to exist in the northern part of Stockton. And then I was asked to go to the Capital City Church in Sacramento. At that time, 800 members. I had a sole pastorate, of course, and I had a Bible instructor who retired recently, Virginia Finley, and she and I worked together there for about three and a half years, and then I was elected by the executive committee to become the executive secretary, which position I assumed in the spring of 1995. I had that job for 6 years under the presidency of Darrell Dretzer, and then when he returned to pastoring and went to the Loma Linda University congregation, I was elected as president, and I served there in Northern for 5.5 years as president, and then in 2006 I was elected by the executive committee of the union to be the executive secretary, and in 2007 Elder Thomas Mostert retired, and I was elected in the fall of that year to be the president, assuming my duties in January 1 of 2008. So that's the track record.
Elder Graham loves a good story and remembers with fondness so many great experiences as a pastor, conference leader, and church administrator. And it's all very personal and heartfelt when he tells them to you. Eventually, I asked Pastor Graham about his own favorite text, and I love what he told me.
My favorite text and why? It's probably Isaiah 41:10, which says, "Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will uphold thee, yea, I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right arm of my righteousness." You know, I don't have to have another story. I have some, but I don't have to have another one to just reinforce the fact that God is alive, He hears prayer, and He answers prayer. I've had many answered prayers. I have not had one that has been answered so quickly, so dramatically perhaps, except, you know, when I was drowning and I called on the Lord to save me, and He did, another story. But that's my favorite text, Isaiah 41:10.
As I listened to Dr. Graham share his story and his favorite text, I couldn't help but think of the words of the prophet Jeremiah, who wrote, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Thank you so much, Dr. Graham. How blessed we are to serve a God who knew us before we were born and knows our hearts and hopes and needs today. That is truly the promise for all God's people. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.